The night was silent, the kind of silence that made even the wind seem afraid to whisper. The farmhouse stood alone at the edge of the valley, its old wooden walls glowing faintly under the pale silver moon. Inside, a human man sat near the fire, sipping the last of his tea. His day had been long, filled with work in the fields, and now he only wanted rest. But peace never lasts forever, and that night, peace broke with a single sound, a knock. It was not the sound of a friendly visitor. It was not the heavy hand of a neighbor, nor the call of a friend. It was soft, uneven, almost trembling. The knock came again, followed by a faint cry, high-pitched, weak, almost like the cry of an infant. The man froze, his cup slipping from his hand and spilling across the wooden floor. His heart beat faster, because he knew no baby lived anywhere near his farm. He rose slowly, each step heavy as he walked toward the door. He placed his hand on the latch, hesitated, then pulled it open. What he saw made him stagger back in shock. A woman stood there, not human. Her skin glowed faint blue in the moonlight, her face covered in dirt and fear. Her clothes were torn, her body trembling, and in her arms she clutched a small bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. The bundle moved, and a tiny sound escaped it. The same weak cry he had heard moments ago. The baby inside was not like any human child. Its eyes opened briefly, shining with a strange golden light before closing again in exhaustion. The man stared, unable to move. The alien woman's lips trembled as she whispered, her voice broken and filled with pain. "Please, take her. I cannot stay. They will find me." The human wanted to ask who they were, but the fear in her eyes was enough to silence his questions. She gently pushed the bundle into his arms, and for the first time he felt its warmth. The baby was light, fragile, and yet the golden glow from its tiny eyes seemed heavy with mystery. "No, wait," he stammered. "I can't." But before he could finish, the woman stepped back into the darkness. Her body seemed to blend with the night, and within seconds she was gone, vanishing into the fields beyond the farmhouse. Only, the sound of her hurried steps faded into the distance, leaving the man standing in the doorway with the alien child in his arms. The farmhouse was suddenly colder. The man shut the door quickly, bolting it as if the wooden lock could protect him from whatever forces had driven that mother to his door. He stared at the baby again. Its small chest rose and fell, each breath weak but steady. Its tiny fingers reached out, curling around his thumb. For a brief moment, his fear melted into something else, an emotion he had not felt in years. Responsibility. He carried the child to the fire, placing it carefully on a blanket. The glow from the flames reflected in the baby's golden eyes as they opened again, watching him with quiet trust. But that trust carried a weight. The man knew nothing about aliens, nothing about raising one of their children. All he knew was that someone out there wanted this baby taken, or dead. A sudden noise outside made him jump, hooves against the dirt road. Voices carried on the wind, sharp and commanding. Soldiers. The man blew out the lantern quickly, plunging the farmhouse into shadows. He crouched near the baby, holding his breath, listening as the voices drew nearer. One voice called out, cold and certain. "She was here, spread out, search every house." The man's chest tightened. He looked down at the baby, who began to whimper softly. He pressed a finger to his lips as if the child could understand his plea for silence. His mind raced. If the soldiers knocked now, what would he say? How could he hide a glowing alien infant in a farmhouse with no secret walls? The footsteps grew louder, crunching on gravel. Shadows moved across his window. The baby stirred again, a soft golden light flickering from its eyes. The man's pulse hammered in his ears. He whispered desperately, "Please, little one, don't make a sound." And then, silence. The footsteps passed by, fading into the distance. The soldiers moved further down the valley, searching elsewhere. The man exhaled shakily, sweat beading across his forehead. He looked again at the baby, whose light was dimming back into peaceful sleep. He realized then that his life had changed forever. He had not asked for this. He had not chosen it. Yet destiny had placed the alien child in his arms. The night was no longer silent. It was heavy with a promise and with danger. And as the fire crackled low, the man whispered to himself, "What have I done?" The night felt endless, and the man could not sleep, because the image of the alien woman leaving her baby at his door would not leave his mind, and every time he closed his eyes he saw her terrified face and the glowing eyes of the infant staring back at him. And he knew that his decision in the next hours would change his life, forever, for better or for worse. So he sat near the fire holding the small child who slept soundly on the blanket, as if unaware of the danger that hunted her kind. And he wondered what kind of enemies could force a mother to abandon her own blood in the hands of a stranger, and what kind of man he would be if he turned away from this responsibility, because part of him wanted to believe this was not his burden, and yet another part whispered that fate had chosen him for a reason he never asked for and never wanted. And outside the farmhouse the world was not quiet, because soldiers patrolled the valley, their boots pressing into the soil, their voices sharp and cruel as they searched for the runaway alien and her child. And the man kept the lamp dim, afraid even of his own shadow on the wall. And he thought about taking the baby to the authorities, but deep inside he knew what they would do. And he saw in his mind the cold metal of cages, the experiments, the cruel hands that would tear this child apart in the name of knowledge and power. And the thought made him shiver in anger and fear. And so he whispered to the baby that he would not let them take her, at least not tonight. And morning came slowly with pale sunlight spreading across the fields, and the man went outside pretending to do his usual chores. But his eyes kept shifting to the horizon, where dust clouds showed signs of soldiers moving between farms, and one of his neighbors walked up to the fence and asked if he had heard strange noises during the night, because some said lights were seen near his property. And the man forced a smile, shaking his head, denying everything, though. Inside his heart pounded like a drum. And he returned to the farmhouse, sweating more than the work demanded, and when he opened the door the baby cried softly, her golden eyes glowing again, filling the small room with a light that felt both beautiful and dangerous, because if anyone saw it, there would be no way to explain. And he rushed to cover her with a thicker cloth, humming an old song to calm her down. And the baby quieted as if she understood his fear, and at that moment the man realized he had already made his choice. He could not hand her over. He could not betray the trust of that desperate mother. He would raise the baby and protect her with his own life if needed, even though he knew the cost could be everything he owned, everything he loved, and maybe even his own future. And that day stretched, longer than any he remembered, because every creak of the wood, every bark of the neighbor's dog, every echo of distant boots sounded like a warning. And when the soldiers finally came to his door near sunset, his blood ran cold and his hands trembled as he opened the door, pretending to be calm while hiding the child behind a stack of grain sacks in the corner. And the officer, with a hard jaw and cold eyes, asked questions about the missing alien and whether he had seen anyone pass through during the night, and the man answered carefully, pretending to be nothing more than a farmer too tired to notice the world beyond his field. And though suspicion lingered in the eyes of the officer, eventually they left, leaving only a threat that anyone found harboring alien fugitives would face death. And after they were gone, the man shut the door, bolted it, and sat beside the baby, who reached out and gripped his finger again. And in that small, fragile gesture he felt the weight of his decision, heavier than chains yet brighter than fire. And he whispered to himself that he would face whatever came next, because this was his path now, and there was no turning back. Days turned into nights, and the man soon realized that the child left in his care was not only fragile but also extraordinary, because the small baby began to show signs that no human infant could ever display. And at first it was little things like how the baby's eyes glowed brighter when she was frightened, or how the air around her seemed to shimmer when she cried, and the man told himself it was only his imagination, born of fear and exhaustion. But deep inside he knew that the child carried secrets. And one evening, as the wind rattled the shutters and the farmhouse groaned with age, he was feeding her warm milk he had mixed from goat's supply, and suddenly the spoon slipped from his hand before he could catch it. The spoon hovered in the air, trembling, as if held by invisible fingers, and then slowly drifted back into the bowl, and the man froze, his heart pounding, because he knew what he had just seen was real. And the baby looked at him with her golden eyes wide and innocent, as if asking him not to fear her. And he whispered to her gently, promising he would not turn away. And as days passed, more strange things began to happen. The small plants near her cradle grew faster, greener and healthier, as if touched by spring itself. Even though the season was fading into cold, and one morning he found that the old scar on his hand, a wound from years of hard work, had faded almost completely after he had held the baby through the night when she had been restless and crying, and these miracles filled him with wonder, but also with dread. Because the neighbors had sharp eyes and sharp tongues, and the village was already uneasy about rumors of alien fugitives and the more unusual events that occurred around his farmhouse, the greater the chance someone would notice and whisper of curses or unnatural forces. And trouble always followed whispers, and one day that trouble nearly found him. When the neighbor's young boy wandered too close to the farmhouse fence chasing after a ball. The man had just stepped outside carrying the baby when the child tripped and fell hard against a rock, scraping his knee badly. Blood ran down his leg, and the boy cried out in pain, and the man hurried to help him. But before he could even place the baby down, the alien child reached out with her tiny hand, glowing brighter than ever, and in seconds the wound on the boy's knee closed, the skin knitting together as if it had never been broken. And the boy stared wide-eyed at his own leg and then at the glowing infant, and before the man could stop him, he ran back toward his house shouting about what had just happened, and the man's chest tightened with fear. Because if the villagers believed the boy, they would come soon with anger and fire in their hearts, and that night the man could not rest. He paced the wooden floor, listening for voices outside the window, and he kept the baby close, whispering to her that she must not show her power again, not if they wanted to stay safe, and though she was too young to understand, it felt as if she listened, her golden eyes calm and filled with quiet trust. But the man knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth reached dangerous ears, and that truth could bring soldiers, neighbors, or worse. And as the wind howled outside the farmhouse, he realized that protecting the child meant more than hiding her. It meant preparing for a storm that was already on its way, and the silence of the valley no longer felt like safety, but like the breath before thunder. The man had begun to live each day in fear and caution because he knew the baby's secret would not stay hidden forever and after. The neighbor's boy had run home healed and shouting about miracles. He expected angry villagers to storm his door. But days passed in uneasy silence until one cold night when the moon was high and the wind was restless. He heard a faint tapping at the window, not a knock, but a trembling rhythm like the whisper of fingers against glass. And when he rose to check, he froze in shock, because standing in the shadows outside was the alien woman, the same mother who had once left her child at his doorstep, her body weaker now, her skin paler, her eyes filled with pain and desperation, and when he opened the door, she stumbled inside her, breathing heavy, her hands shaking, and the baby in his arms stirred as if sensing her mother's presence. And when the child's golden eyes met the alien woman's tired gaze, a quiet cry escaped her lips, soft but filled with longing, and the woman knelt, despite her weakness, reaching for her child, clutching her gently as tears ran down her cheeks, and the man could see the truth in her face. This mother had not abandoned her child out of coldness. She had left her to save her, and now she returned at great risk to see her once more. And when the man asked what hunted her, she whispered of her own people and their rulers who believed the child carried power too great to leave free, and they had sent hunters and soldiers to find her, and if captured they would raise her as a weapon, stripping her of innocence and kindness and turning her into a tool of destruction. And that was why the woman had chosen the unthinkable, leaving her with a human, a stranger, because she trusted that humanity, though often feared by her kind, could still hold compassion and protect what her own people would destroy. And the man listened, his heart torn between anger and pity, because he had already begun to feel like a father to this child, and now he understood the depth of the danger surrounding them. And before he could ask more, a sharp sound outside froze both of them in place, voices carried in the wind, low and harsh, followed by the snap of branches under heavy boots, and the alien mother's eyes widened in terror. She clutched the baby close before quickly handing her back to the man, whispering that hunters had tracked her here and that he must protect the child at all costs because she could not fight them in her weakened state. And before the man could stop her, she slipped into the darkness once more, moving like a shadow, desperate to draw the danger away from her daughter. And the man wanted to run after her, but the baby cried in his arms, glowing brighter than ever, and he realized that staying hidden was their only hope. And through the cracks in the wooden wall, He saw armored figures moving silently through the field, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight, their faces covered by strange masks that glowed faint red, and he pressed his back against the wall, holding the baby close. His breath shallow as the hunters passed by searching for signs of life, and one of them paused near the door, his hand brushing against the wood as if sensing something inside, and the man's heart nearly stopped, because even the baby seemed to hold her breath until the hunter finally moved on, leaving behind a silence more suffocating than the storm itself. And when the danger had passed, the man looked down at the child whose tiny hand clung to his finger, and he whispered that he would not fail her. And though the mother had vanished again, he knew she would return because love always returned even when danger chased it to the ends of the world. The days that followed were heavier than stone because the man carried not only the weight of the alien child in his arms but also the burden of growing suspicion from the people around him, and whispers had begun to stir in the village about strange lights seen at night, and fields blooming too fast, and livestock healing without reason. And though no one said his name aloud, their eyes often drifted toward his farmhouse with doubt and unease, and the man could feel the invisible wall of trust crumbling each time he passed through the market, where voices hushed and stares sharpened. And he tried to remain calm, focusing on chores, tending his animals, and raising the baby. But the truth was that the child's powers could not always be contained, and one evening when a storm had struck the valley, tearing branches from trees and ripping fences apart, the baby had cried so fiercely that the lightning itself seemed to bend away from the farmhouse, striking the fields instead, as if the sky itself obeyed her will. And though the man was thankful to be spared from destruction, he knew that others had seen the strange direction of the storm and that they would not dismiss it as chance. And his fears came true when 3 of his neighbors arrived at his door demanding answers. Their faces stern, their voices rough with anger, they accused him of harboring something unholy, something dangerous, and though he tried to calm them, saying he was only a tired farmer with nothing more than an orphan child, their eyes darted past him searching for proof. And in that tense moment, the baby let out a cry from her blanket inside the house, and her golden eyes flickered through the gap in the cloth, and the neighbors stepped back in shock, crossing themselves, whispering curses, calling her a demon child. And before the man could explain, they stormed away, vowing to warn the others, and that night the man sat awake holding the baby close, his thoughts heavy as the sound of distant voices echoed across the valley, voices filled with fear and hatred. And the next day more villagers gathered outside his fence, their numbers greater, their shouts louder, and some carried torches while others held stones, calling him a traitor and demanding he surrender the alien spawn. And in the chaos, one man even threw a rock that struck the farmhouse wall, shattering wood and scattering straw, and the baby wailed in terror, her glow filling the room like a beacon, and the man's heart burned with both rage and desperation. He stood at the door, holding the child high, shouting at the mob that she was innocent, that she was not a curse but a gift, and though his voice carried strength, the crowd only grew angrier, their fear stronger than reason, and for a moment it seemed they would break through and drag him out. But then the storm clouds gathered again, swirling above as if called by the child's fear, and thunder rolled so loud that the mob froze, staring upward as the sky turned black with fury, and lightning struck the ground nearby, sending sparks and fire through the wet grass, and the villagers screamed, running back toward the safety of their homes, dropping their stones and torches in panic, and the valley fell silent once more except for the baby's sobs and the man's shaking breaths. And as he looked into her glowing eyes, he knew the village would never forgive him and never accept her, not after what they had seen. And he whispered to her that they would have to leave soon because the world around them was closing in, and if they stayed, the next mob would not run from fear, but return with fire and soldiers, and there would be no mercy then. The man did not sleep that night because he knew the village would not remain silent for long, and even if the people feared the storm, they had witnessed their anger would return stronger, and their courage would grow when soldiers or hunters arrived to back their suspicion. So he spent the dark hours packing what little food he had, gathering warm clothes, and wrapping the baby in the thickest blanket he owned, because he had decided that by morning they would leave the farmhouse behind, the only home he had ever known. And as the first light crept over the valley, he stepped outside, listening to the restless silence. But silence often hides danger, and soon he saw the signs that confirmed his fears, because tracks of armored boots scarred The dirt road and strange metallic fragments glimmered in the grass marks of alien hunters. And when he heard the faint hum of energy weapons charging somewhere near the tree line, he knew they were already here, and he hurried back inside, whispering to the baby to stay quiet as he strapped her close to his chest beneath his coat, and then he took a deep breath, pushing open the back door and slipping into the forest beyond the fields, moving quickly through the undergrowth, his heart pounding with every step because he could feel eyes watching from the shadows. The hunters were not simple soldiers. They were trackers bred and trained to pursue prey across worlds, and soon the silence broke with the cry of hounds, not dogs of Earth, but alien beasts with scaled hides and burning eyes unleashed to sniff out their quarry. And the man pushed himself harder, stumbling through the thick brush carrying the child as the sound of pursuit grew closer and branches tore at his arms and face. And still he pressed on until he burst into a small clearing, only to stop cold because the ground before him shimmered with faint blue light lines drawn in a pattern that pulsed with energy. And before he could retreat, the trap activated a cage of glowing barriers rising around him, blocking every path, and from the trees stepped the hunters, their armor dark, their visors glowing red, their weapons humming with lethal power, and the leader raised his hand, ordering silence as he approached. And though his face was hidden, his voice was sharp and cruel as he demanded the child and promised the man a quick death if he refused. And the man felt the baby stir against his chest, her golden eyes flickering through the folds of the blanket, and he knew the hunters had already seen enough to confirm their prize, and despair gripped him like chains because he had no weapon, no power, no allies, only his own determination. And he whispered softly to the child, telling her not to fear as he stepped backward toward the edge of the glowing barrier, feeling its energy sting his back like fire. And then he remembered the alien mother's words spoken the night she had returned in shadows, that the child was more than they could understand, that her power was not meant for war but for life and love and survival. And as the hunters raised their weapons, the baby began to cry, her glow bursting brighter than ever, filling the cage of energy with blinding light so intense the hunters stumbled, shielding their eyes, their weapons sparking uselessly against the flood of power. And the man held her close, standing firm even as the ground itself trembled, and the barrier shattered in a burst of crackling shards. And in the chaos he ran, carrying the child through the gap while the hunters struggled to regain control, their hounds whining and retreating from the light. And though his lungs burned and his body ached, he did not stop until the forest swallowed him again, leaving behind the ruins of the trap and the furious cries of enemies who now knew that their prey was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The man stumbled through the forest, his breath ragged, his arms trembling from exhaustion, yet he held the child close, never loosening his grip because he knew the hunters would not stop until they had taken her. And as the night deepened, he found shelter in an abandoned barn. Its wooden beams cracked, its roof broken, but still strong enough to hide them for a short time. And he laid the baby down on a pile of hay, whispering soft words of comfort, though his own heart thundered with fear, because he could already hear the distant hum of engines and the calls of hunters sweeping the valley, their red lights flickering between the trees like predators circling their prey. And he realized there was nowhere left to run. No village would shelter him. No road would remain safe, and sooner or later the hunters would corner them, and he could not allow the child to fall into their hands. So he decided that if this barn was to be the end, then he would make his stand here. And he searched the shadows, gathering rusted tools and broken boards, fashioning them into crude weapons, though he knew they were weak compared to alien steel. And still he set them in place by the door, determined to fight with whatever strength he had left. And when the baby stirred, looking at him with glowing golden eyes, he felt her tiny hand clutch his finger, as if lending him courage, and he whispered that he would never let her go, that even if he fell, she would not face them alone, because he would stand until his last breath. And soon the night exploded with noise as the hunters arrived, their boots heavy, their voices sharp, their hounds growling at the scent, and the door of the barn shook under their blows, and the man raised his weapon, a broken pitchfork, his body ready, though his mind whispered of death, and still he refused to yield. And the door burst open, and the hunters stormed inside, their armor gleaming, their weapons raised, but before they could fire, the baby cried out a sound not of fear, but of power. And the barn filled with a blinding golden light so pure and fierce that the hunters staggered back, their visors cracking, their weapons sputtering useless in their hands, and the man shielded the child with his body. Yet he felt no pain, only warmth like sunlight breaking through endless winter. And in that moment, the alien mother appeared from the shadows, her face pale, her body weak, yet her eyes burning with the fire of a mother's love, and she stood beside the man, her hands raised as she called to her child, and together the glow became stronger, the walls of the barn shaking as if the world itself answered their bond, and the hunters cried out, retreating under the force of light that pushed them away, scattering them into the night like leaves before a storm. And when the power faded, the barn stood silent, the baby safe in her mother's arms, and the man collapsed to his knees, tears in his eyes, not of fear but of relief because they had survived. And the alien mother turned to him, whispering her gratitude, saying that without his courage, her child would have been lost to darkness, and she placed her hand on his shoulder, promising that though their worlds were different, their bond had become one. And as dawn broke across the valley, painting the sky with gold, the man looked at the child and the mother standing in the soft light, and he realized that his home was no longer the farmhouse nor the valley, but wherever they were together. Because family was not written in blood or born from the same world. It was chosen in the moments when one life stood to protect another, and in that choice he had found his true destiny.